By now, we're all familiar with Rivian. Although it hasn't been a perfectly smooth road since the company began delivering the first R1Ts in 2021, by EV startup standards, things haven't been that bad for Rivian. In 2022, Rivian brought its second model, the R1S, to production as a full-size off-road oriented SUV, and now Rivian has plans to introduce another SUV to the lineup. Hey, I'm Creech and this is Creech & Cars, and today I'm going to be going over everything we know so far about the upcoming Rivian R2, an all-new fully electric off-road SUV and truck. I'll go over the potential interior and exterior design, and then I'll take a look at the features and performance specs the R2 has to offer. Finally, I'll go over pricing and discuss whether or not the Rivian R2 will be successful. But first, here's a basic overview of the model and its position within the brand. Everything we know for sure comes from a conference call where Rivian's CFO confirmed the R2 was in development and that it would be priced below the R1T and R1S. Also, most of the press has been focused on the R2 being an SUV, but chances are there will be both a truck and SUV version of the R2. So just like the R1, there will be the R2S as a midsize SUV and the R2T as a midsize truck. Other than that, there isn't much concrete information, but considering Rivian's clearly defined brand image and design language, we can put together a very good picture of what the R2 might look like. So I'm going to take a look at some very good renderings from carscoops.com, definitely check them out. And overall, the main takeaway here is that the R2 should essentially be a smaller version of the R1. Starting with the R2S, we can see the now recognizable Rivian front end, although it's much sleeker and a little more angular and aggressive than the boxy R1S. The side profile shows some decent fender flares, and I would expect the R2 to share the same flush door handle design that is currently found on Rivian models. Some of the wheel designs in the rendering look a little overdone in my opinion, and I think the production model will have something pretty similar to what Rivian currently offers. A lower roofline adds to the clean and sleek look. As we move around to the rear, here the designers changed up the light bar design a little bit from what Rivian normally does, and I think the real R2 would have the same solid light bar that Rivian has been using, just adjusted to the size of the vehicle. And below the light there is the Rivian script, and the design finishes off with a nice looking bumper complemented by clean body lines. Moving on to the R2T, we can again see the Rivian front end design, but also a little more aggressive and sportier than the R1T. This rendering also features a little more of the bronze accenting, and I think it looks really good and high-end, while simultaneously setting the R2T apart from the midsize truck crowd. The side is similar to the R2S, but with more of an accentuated hip line that leads to the bed. I would assume the R2T would only come in the crew cab configuration like the R1T, and that would mean the bed would be no longer than 5.5 feet and probably only 5 feet long. I think this rear end design in particular is the most accurate with the thin light bar and the Rivian script. Here's another rear end design where the designers changed up the light bar a little bit, but I think the first one is more like what the production version would look like. Now let's move inside and take a look at the potential interior design. I think these renderings look really good. We can expect the R2's interior to have similar design cues to the R1, but a little stripped down and a little less luxurious. There's still going to be a lot of screen area, which is to be expected with any modern car now, especially EVs, but unlike the R1, the digital gauge cluster and larger infotainment screen are on the same panel, although they are still two separate screens. There are no physical buttons except for a few controls on the steering wheel and the window and seat controls, of course. The dash and center console are pretty basic and utility oriented, but the door panels look quite nice with some more of the copper or bronze trim. The seats look pretty nice as well, although the color choices in the renderings are a bit odd. The interior should be essentially the same for the truck and SUV versions, except for the cargo area, of course. There won't be space for a third row in the R2S, and there will be less room inside, but it should still be ample, being in the mid-size segment. So that's what the R2 might look like, but what about powertrain and other specs? Well, with it being smaller and cheaper than the R1, it will likely have far less in terms of power compared to the monstrous numbers boasted by the quad-motor R1, but even if it only comes with two motors, you can expect 500 to 600 horsepower and a sub 4 second 0 to 60 time. And even with no option for the quad-motor setup, you can still expect to see the R2 come standard with all-wheel drive by having a motor on each axle. While the R2 won't be as capable off-road as its larger sibling platform, It should share a lot of the software and hardware combined with decent power to be able to tackle lots of tough conditions off-road. And again, I doubt the R2 will offer the quad motor setup, but there may be an optional 3-motor setup that is not currently on the R1, where you could have something like a motor at each rear wheel and then one on the front axle. So that would be a major option that would boost power and capability. As far as battery setup and range, I think the R2 would only get the standard and large battery packs and not have the option for the max battery pack. The standard and large are 105 kilowatt hours and 135 kilowatt hours respectively, meaning the standard would provide around 250 to 300 miles of range, and the large would provide around 300 to 350 miles of range. Buyers will have the option for all-season tires or all-terrain tires, and it is known that with the all-terrain tires, performance and range take a small hit on streets, but of course greatly improve off-road performance. As for interior features, the R2 will be a little more basic than the R1, but still luxurious with similar materials and finishes. One issue some people may have with Rivian's current infotainment system is that there's no Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, and there's no sign of changing that for the R2, although it's possible Rivian will adopt it in the coming years. Rivian plans to officially unveil the R2 sometime in 2024 and presumably begin taking pre-orders from there. The R2 will start around $40,000 and top out around $60,000, so much more affordable than the R1. So with all that information in mind, will the R2S and R2T be successful? This question was essentially the focus of the brief statements about the R2 made by Rivian's CFO. She said that the average transaction price for a Rivian has been about $73,000, and having a cheaper model will certainly broaden the appeal of Rivian as a whole and attract more potential customers who are looking around that price range. And I do think the $40,000 to $60,000 range is a good one to target. This would mean a fairly well-equipped model for say $50,000 could be an alternative to the Tesla Model Y, Ford Mach-E, and Kia EV6 from a brand with a more rugged image than those just mentioned that also gives great performance and comfort. Furthermore, the CFO went on to say that building out the lineup with smaller and cheaper vehicles is a step towards making Rivian a global brand, and I think with brands like Tesla being able to do well with EVs overseas, there's no reason Rivian shouldn't be able to capitalize with a well-priced alternative to the large markets outside of the US. One major challenge has of course been supply chain issues for the initial production of R1 models, but the CFO has said that as things improve industry-wide and as things improve for Rivian, the brand has had more opportunities to get the supplies and materials it needs at a lower cost. So if the R2 can attract more customers to the brand at a good price, the final challenge will be actually producing them. Right now, Rivian has one factory in Normal, Illinois, and by 2026, that factory will be at capacity, producing 150,000 units per year of the R1 and electric delivery van. But Rivian is currently building a second factory in Georgia, and as of now, it seems that that factory will solely produce the R2 starting in 2026. So that's everything we know right now about the Rivian R2 platform. Would you consider the R2 over competition like the Model Y or Mach-E? Let me know in the comments down below. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to check out the other videos in the Startup Showcase playlist and subscribe so you don't miss future videos. Also, please consider giving the video a like. That helps me out a lot. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.